Throughout the entire history of the B-17 in World War II, there is perhaps one infamous series of photos that perfectly showcases the brutality, risk, and sacrifice that these men undertook in their battle against tyranny. Now, for the first time, the story behind these photos will be told, from the squadron diaries, archive records, and from the men who flew it. So prepare to follow and relive the story behind what may be the most brutal group of B-17 photos ever taken. In the spring of 1945, most would say that the war in Europe was all but won. And while the Germans were certainly on the retreat, the air war was still in full swing, as every day that the enemy refused to surrender was another day that Americans would be killed. Thus, large-scale bombing raids were still taking place to force the Germans into capitulation and to end the long and deadly conflict in Europe. One of these final all-out raids would take place on April 8th of 1945. In Bassingbourn, England, one of the participating units, the 91st Bomb Group, was being briefed for their mission, as the forts were being warmed up near the runway. Here, being prepped for takeoff, was the oldest B-17G in the entire group, a storied aircraft by the name of Wee Willie. Wee Willie was a bomber that joined the 91st many months earlier, and had now completed an astounding 128 missions for the 8th Air Force. This means that during her time on the front lines, she had seen no less than 4 crews complete their entire tours of duty upon her reliable and trustworthy wings. Here we can see one of the earlier photos of Wee Willie, boasting just 4 missions completed. And then here, an unidentified crew months later with 106 bombs painted, showing her status as the seasoned veteran of one of the most famed bomb groups in the mighty 8th. Unfortunately, due to her destiny on this mission, there is not a ton of clear information about her crew and the details of their fate. However, I have dug deep into all of the records to get the most information possible. Her crew for April 8th of 1945 is listed here, and led by their captain, Lieutenant Robert E. Fuller. I was unable, however, to find a photo of this crew, and after research, I was able to uncover why. The crew for this mission was described as a strange ship or a strange crew, and this made it clear that this group was not a normal crew, but instead one that was thrown together from stragglers to participate in this mission. This happened sometimes in the mighty 8th as extras were needed or crews were in need of replacements. And although I wasn't able to find a great deal of info on the crew, it does appear that individually many of these crew members were seasoned veterans. One of them can be seen here, Lieutenant Woodrow Lean, as having already flown 19 missions and received a Purple Heart, and others with air medals already pinned to their uniforms almost at the end of their tour. So this was by no means a rookie crew. It was a group of experienced flyers from all around the 91st, on board of what was, no doubt, the most prestigious bomber still flying in the group. One would think that such a crew would be safe so close to the end of hostilities over Europe. But that couldn't be farther from the truth. As Wee Willie and her estranged crew took off, they were headed for locomotive repair shops in Stendal, Germany. Here we can take a look at the mission map straight from the records of the 91st Bomb Group. And this flight path would be fairly straightforward, taking the group deep into Europe, just short of Berlin, where they were to hit their target and come back home. And with the depleted Luftwaffe at this time in the war, German fighter resistance was negligent. The only real threat left was flak. And although the Germans were clearly losing the war, their anti-aircraft crews were still at the top of their game. And the evidence of this can be seen, plain as day, from the after-action report, which lists the flak as meager and moderate, but still very accurate in their tracking, and that it was the most severe and greatest in quantity all around the immediate target area. Wee Willie and her crew would be destined to find this out firsthand, as the 91st had just released bombs over Stendal, Germany. A round of flak was fired up from an anti-aircraft battery. It soared upwards 20,000 feet and struck Wee Willie directly in the left wing. The round exploded and set fire to the oldest and most accomplished B-17G left in the group. This fire immediately broke out on the wing and engulfed the bomber so quickly that control was almost immediately lost. The following is a statement from another member of the 91st Bomb Group who witnessed this hit.
We were flying over the target at 20,500 feet altitude when I observed aircraft B-17G 4231333 to receive a direct flak hit approximately between the bomb bay and number 2 engine. The aircraft immediately started into a vertical dive. The aircraft fuselage was on fire, and when it had dropped approximately 5,000 feet, the left wing fell off. It continued down, and when the fuselage was about 3,000 feet from the ground, it exploded, and then exploded again when it hit the ground. I saw no crew members leave the aircraft or parachutes open.
Now, as this series of brutal events happened in just a few minutes over Germany, this fellow aviator was not the only witness to the direct hit. Flying just above Wee Willie at this moment were fellow 91st B-17s, equipped with strike cameras that were designed to capture photos of the target area just a few moments after the bombs hit the ground. Thus, these cameras were currently snapping pictures and pointed directly downward. But at the moment, the target was concealed, and instead, directly in the focus of their lens was B-17 Wee Willie, creating a series of photos that would go down as some of the most devastating taken in the air war over Europe. Now, based on my analyzing of these photos, I believe there are likely 2 separate strike cameras that captured this moment, as there are varying frame sizes. Here I have colorized the photos, and we can review what lies within. In this first photo, Wee Willie has just been hit and is clearly burning in an intense fire with her fuel no doubt ablaze. This is likely only about 10 seconds after the direct hit. Then we have 2 other photos taken about 30 seconds later. We can see that the fire has now run its course and that the left wing has broken off, just as the witness reported. And also, we can see that the intense fire has totally burned away the fabric on the control surfaces in just a few seconds. At this point, the G-forces are far too intense for any crew member to bail out. Wee Willie is in a death spiral, and the crew members are pinned down within or passed out, left to their inevitable fate. And then, still 1 minute later, we can see the final photos. Here, also as listed in the witness report, Wee Willie then explodes and breaks apart, with debris and pieces flying across the sky as she plummets down to Earth. One of the most difficult photos of the air war that one can possibly view. But perhaps in this moment, there is one silver lining that can be found. And it is this little note found right here, beside the name of pilot Robert E. Fuller. RTD stands for Return to Duty. In one of the most improbable escapes of the war, despite the fact that multiple witnesses listed no parachutes seen, Lieutenant Robert Fuller, the pilot of Wee Willie, was apparently blown out of the aircraft in the explosion and was somehow able to deploy his parachute, becoming the only survivor in this iconic series of photos. And fascinatingly, that means that somewhere here, in a photo of chaos, death, and destruction, there is one young American survivor, defying the odds and escaping an almost certain demise. Robert Fuller apparently would become a prisoner of war and survive the conflict. But tragically, I was unable to locate anything on him after the war, other than a likely death in 1988. One can understand how someone who was the only survivor from his crew would have likely wanted to keep that to himself. But for the other crew members, however, I was. Here we can see Sergeant James D. Hutchins, waist gunner of WWII, in an article officially listing him as missing in action. Or here, where top turret gunner Sergeant Wiley McNatt Jr. was also listed as MIA, but then incorrectly listed as a prisoner of war in the local paper. Or finally, an article for the memorial rights of co-pilot Second Lieutenant Woodrow Lean. And I believe this article needs to be read because it sheds some of the only light into the fate of this doomed bomber and her sole survivor. And to be honest, it is quite brutal for a 1940s newspaper to publish.
July 13th memorial services were held Sunday at Our Savior's Church at Brockton for Second Lieutenant Woodrow Lean, son of Mr. and Mrs. O. Lean of Brockton. In January of 1945, he went to England and made 18 trips as a pilot of a flying fortress, bombing enemy targets. He made his 19th trip April 8, 1945, as co-pilot of a strange ship, the Wee Willie. The plane received a direct hit over Germany. The tanks in the left wing exploded, tearing most of the wing and front section from the ship. Only one member of the crew is known to be alive, Lieutenant R.E. Fuller, now in Van Nuys, California hospital with leg wounds. All others are missing or dead. Lean had been awarded the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, a presidential citation, a battle star for European Theater of Operation, and the Purple Heart.
In the end, Wee Willie would be one of the last B-17s lost in the war over Europe on her 129th mission of the war. She would be cemented into history by a series of iconic photographs taken by chance showing the horrific fate of her crew. Please consider joining my free history newsletter here for great stories sent right to you, or support me on Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.